Thank you everyone for joining us this evening, both in person and online. We are streaming to YouTube and we are also live via Zoom. This is the State Senate Candidate Forum. I'm Tony Noble. I'm the president of the Orient Heights Neighborhood Council, and I'm joined here by City Councilor and State Senate candidate Lydia Edwards. Unfortunately, Mr. Anthony D'Ambrosio will be unable to attend this evening due to a miscommunication that occurred during the planning of this event. The D'Ambrosio campaign will be holding a meet and greet / Q&A session at Mavericks Restaurant in Maverick Square tomorrow, December 2nd at 6 p.m. There will also be a forum on Monday, December 6th at 7:30 p.m. in Winthrop that can be attended via Zoom. We're currently awaiting the Zoom details and we'll share them when they are available. Matt Barrison, Harborview Neighborhood Association co-chair, will be handling the Zoom room and YouTube stream throughout this event. Thank you all for your question submissions and for joining us this evening. Lydia Edwards, if you would like to provide us with an opening statement.
Sure, and if it's okay with those in the room, I'm going to take off my mask.
Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Lydia Edwards, and I am the Boston City Council representing East Boston, Charlestown, and North End. I am running today to be your state senator to continue my advocacy for not only our neighborhood, but to assure that all people have a voice at the table, especially in Beacon Hill. We're dealing with a moment in our history where we are asking ourselves how we are emerging from this pandemic, and what lessons have we learned, and how are we going to implement them in a way that is equitable and truly reflective of the needs of today. I believe that I have the record in leadership, I have the record in writing statewide legislation, I have the record in building coalition, and I have the record in getting things done that has made me uniquely prepared for this moment, this time, and to represent the 1st Suffolk and Middlesex. So I'm asking for your vote on December 14th, and I'm asking for you to put me in the room where it happens to make sure that you are represented and you have a voice. Thank you.
Thank you. We will move on to pre-planned questions. These have been provided to Lydia in advance. The first question I will read in Spanish and then the translated version. Somos un país y una región de inmigrantes. ¿Qué has hecho por la comunidad de inmigrantes? Admite licencias de conducir. ¿Qué ha de convertirse en un estado santuario? We are a country and region of immigrants. What have you done for the immigrant community? Do you support driver's licenses for immigrants? What about becoming a sanctuary state? And this is an anonymous question.
Gracias por este tiempo. Yo voy a explicar en español, después en inglés. Primero sí, yo tengo récord ya para muchos años ayudando a la comunidad de inmigrantes. Primero comenzando con la clínica para los trabajadores del hogar y también representando inmigrantes en la corte cuando yo estaba dirigiendo o manejando sin licencias. Yo estaba siempre luchando por los derechos porque yo creo en la dignidad de humano, no importa si nací en este país o en otros lugares. Entonces, simplemente yo soportar licencias para todos y también yo creo que es muy importante para nosotros para tener confianza en la policía, para separar las policías locales con los sistemas federales para inmigración. So, I have, first of all, and I should say this, I should have said this in Spanish, but I'll say it also right now in English. I have been a long supporter and advocate for immigrants and immigrant rights. This is for many years. I was an attorney, and in many cases I represented domestic workers, I represented individuals who had been driving without a license, and I've also fought for those movements to assure that people are able to move with dignity in the Commonwealth. I believe, quite frankly, that a person's humanity and dignity is not defined by a piece of paper. I also believe, quite frankly, for trust in the police, we need to separate police and their crime investigations from the federal government and our federal immigration system. The two do not need to be married. What we need is criminal law enforcement and to be separate and for us to be investigating. Being here without documents is not in and of itself simply a criminal act. In many cases, I have friends, family, who are in the process of becoming U.S. citizens, and I don't want that ever to be seen as a criminalized thing. I also want to thank many of the immigrant women and men who taught me Spanish, who taught me Portuguese, who taught me about organizing, and I am forever in their debt. And if East Boston is too, we are a community of immigrants. We are only second to Ellis Island in the amount of immigrants that came to this country and helped to become Americans in this country and helped to build our country. So I think it's only part of our roots to make sure that we support, uplift, and work with immigrants.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Heather O'Brien, an Orient Heights Neighborhood Council member. She asks, what actions have you taken to protect the environment, such as the Belle Isle Marsh and wetlands?
Sure, and this is why especially I want to be a senator, because our environmental justice is deeply connected. It doesn't end at the end of a city's borders, and no one city can handle the absolute the cleanliness of our air, or making sure that we have a waterfront that is accessible. That is a regional conversation. And so, as a city councilor, I have already taken on fights against the substation. I held the first 5-hour hearing where we required Eversource to come and answer questions for the first time in English and Spanish in East Boston. I also have been a stalwart supporter of making sure that when we plan our city and when we think about our future, that it is green and also paid by green jobs. One of the best examples is in Suffolk Downs, where we specifically were centering the marsh and making sure it was protected from overdevelopment, while at the same time making sure that we built and had jobs that were available that were union. The two can come together, and we want those jobs also to be green. I think what's really important also is that standards that we set in Boston could also be replicated statewide. BERDO, for example, the Building Emissions Reduction Act, is something that we did pass in Boston. And that actually helps with a reduction of emissions, where about 7% of buildings are responsible for 80% of the environmental emissions. We could be building better, stronger, and creating more jobs, and that's something we push through. The first piece of legislation that Mayor Wu signed, I wrote, and that was to divest from fossil fuels. Upon her signature, $65 million of Boston's money was divested from fossil fuels, and we will not be investing in fossil fuels going forward. That is one of the best fiscal decisions we could make as a city, and I hope to be part of helping to make that decision as a state. The return on investment for green infrastructure, green alternative energies is exponentially higher than fossil fuels. Fossil fuels should stay in the ground. We should be doing everything we can to be building infrastructure with our federal money to make sure that we are building a greener future. That's the way forward. And so I have the record at the local level just in planning, in actual legislation, and also have proposed pre-tax benefits to actually help a lot of workers save money. Pre-tax benefits as a requirement in Boston would require that employers offer these benefits to people to make it cheaper for them to commute to work and use public transportation. That is something actually Representative Steve Owens, who's endorsed me, mentioned it was the inspiration for him to file the statewide bill. So I'm already part of this conversation, and I look forward to hopefully getting more pre-tax benefits, making sure we're building greener, and also developing with an eye towards the region that is green and protecting our marsh.
Thank you. Our next question comes from the Harborview Neighborhood Association co-chair, Skip Marcella. He says, candidates have both spoken about the need to improve the infrastructure in our schools and how important education is. How do you propose to fund these improvements?
So I am a product of public schools, and I deeply believe that but for the incredible teachers I had and the fact that the education was free and close to my home, if I didn't have those opportunities, I would not be here today. The first homeowner of my family, the first attorney of my family, and honestly the first politician and running for office in my family. I'm literally living like my ancestors' wildest dreams, being here, being able to do this. Many of you are as well. And so I believe so deeply that we need to keep education free, we need to keep it public, and we need to keep it at a quality that parents feel like they have options for them to choose from. Now, how does that get paid for? Well, you need to define what is education first. It isn't just in the school building from 9 to 5. I was in many daycare systems because my mother was a single mother raising myself and her twin sister. But we had daycares available on the military bases that we grew up. As you know, my mother is an Air Force veteran. And that system allowed my mother to go to work having good, affordable daycare. That is part of our education system. The next part, of course, is the 9 to 5 or the regular school system that starts at K0 and continues on. But let's not forget after 5 o'clock. You know, my sister and I were very busy. I was in band, I played the oboe. I was able to do that for free and learn music and be in art classes. I had after-school programs that were vibrant. I had summer camps. All of these things were available for little to no cost. That is also part of our education. And it does cost a lot of money. And it should, because it's worth the investment. So how do you pay for that? Well, we do have some federal money, and that's an investment that's probably generational. The other thing is to look, quite frankly, at the Fair Tax Amendment, which I have supported. The Fair Share Tax Amendment would be for people who make over $1 million, and that they would be taxed a certain percentage over that first $1 million that they've earned. And that would go to two things: transportation infrastructure and education. That's the long-term plan and long-term systemic way in which we can fund our education system, and it works. I also think that we need to truly, honestly define education and our structures as our buildings. As you know, in East Boston, we have the oldest buildings in Boston. So whether these buildings are safe, lead-free, whether they have HEPA filters, all of these different things are important that we also have funding. And we should absolutely be looking to our neighbor, Massport, to help pay for that. They have an agreement, a pilot program, a payment in lieu of taxes with Massport. And I would use that same agreement throughout the region for Winthrop, for Revere, and to continue for Boston, to make sure that their payment in lieu of taxes, because they're not taxed, is also helping to build up our education infrastructure. So I would definitely flex my LLM degree and my master's in tax to continue up with different ways to come up with ways to fund our education. But I think I've talked a great deal, and I don't know that you guys like taxes that much. But still, happy to continue that conversation, Skip.
Thank you again. Now we're going to move on to our final prepared question. This is from an anonymous attendee. They're asking, how do you plan to support addiction services and SUD, substance use disorder, recovery efforts if elected?
Thank you very much for that question. And first is to acknowledge that we have a crisis. And that crisis is twofold. One, that many people obviously have substance abuse disorder, but the other is that we have a continued unfortunate stigma when it comes to the very clear mental health issue. That is what it is fundamentally. It is a health issue, and unfortunately people have seen it as a character flaw. I've seen it with people who are in my family, my friends. I've seen how they feel judged and how it's even harder to come forward for help. I want you to know that fundamentally, the way that we should be approaching this is not only centered in a health issue, but in a humanity issue. And understanding that investing heavily in making sure that there's clean housing, that there's supportive housing, that there's a regional response, that every single city and town truly believes that they're part of this, is how we're going to get through this. You know, I look to the grassroots efforts where people just simply met with each other for coffee at our soup kitchen in East Boston, where we really created a community sense. And I honestly have to thank the soup kitchen and the volunteers. I've met people who were homeless, housing insecure in East Boston, looking them face to face, touching my heart and understanding what they're going through. It made me a better politician. Honestly, being in service to people. I think there's policies such as the MARC policy that Senator Boncory supported that actually simply made our state laws in line with the federal laws so that people aren't dealing with a system that is mismatched, that's underfunded, and completely confusing. I, as a legal services attorney, have had to try and navigate people through all of these different systems and trying to do all of that and try to stay sober and try to get over the stigma and try to get a job and try to get your kids back and try to pay rent. That is what we are asking people to do. And I think as a society, we need to create regional hubs that are funded, that people feel comfortable going to, that family members feel comfortable going to, and saying collectively this community is a place of healing. I want to also shout out Recovery on the Harbor, a wonderful place that has just been opened up in East Boston where people are coming together to do just that. job applications, cooking lessons, meetings every single night and throughout the day. That's the kind of regional hub that we need to bring to scale so that it's not just in East Boston on Bennington Street, but it's for East Boston, Winthrop, Revere, for all of Boston and Cambridgeport. We can set the mold and we need to fund that. But again, we need to see it as the healthcare crisis that it is. Look how we responded to COVID. We didn't pretend that it was anything else but a healthcare crisis. We put the money in there. We said we need to do these things. We need to move. And that's how we need to treat this opioid epidemic.
These next 6 questions were chosen right before the start of this event and have not been prepared for. The first question is also from an anonymous attendee. They ask, what do you understand to be the top 3 areas for concern for East Boston residents, and how will your work in the Senate address these concerns?
In the time that I have been a city councilor, there have been recurring themes around 3 areas: housing, environmental justice, and education. And when it comes to housing, it is a regional issue and regional concern. We need to start to define affordability based on the actual incomes of the people in the neighborhoods, instead of by some rubric that includes Newton and includes Brookline and other cities that have much higher average incomes. We need to also begin to plan at a regional level. I'm proud to have introduced and passed the first zoning amendment that actually looks at equity in order to approve a building and whether it makes the community more equitable and accessible and diverse. And I also believe that we need to be pushing, quite frankly, for more from developers. I'm proud to have also set up the first neighborhood housing trust in the city of Boston with well over $2.5 million in there to start. We've also gotten well over a couple $100,000 more in that housing trust. And who's going to control that money? The people of East Boston. The 12 names will be submitted to Mayor Wu, and they will control whether it goes to rent assistance, down payment assistance, housing trust, or land trust, excuse me. That's what I believe you should do with any issue. I love, obviously, policy, but I've learned more than anything in the world that the best policies and the best solutions will come from the people who are impacted by them. So that's why we set up the trust that way. When it comes to education, again, we are a city, or excuse me, in East Boston specifically, as the question is for East Boston, has been around our public schools. We also have charter schools here. The fact is, we can offer our parents nothing more than true options where they can make the best decision for their family. We also need to see our children and our families for who they are and the true everyday needs that they have. In East Boston, we have a very high population of ELL students. We also have a population of students who are SPED, or special education, and our resources need to match those needs of the community. So I would honestly sit down and talk to parents more. Again, the people most impacted by our policies are the parents who have to get up and work every day in this pandemic, who had to babysit their kids, who had to try and educate their kids on Zoom for the first time. I feel for a lot of the parents who are doing everything they could and trying to work and put food on the table. Again, policy centered in how much do you need, but also where do you need it, coming from the people who are impacted. That's for education. And finally, environmental justice. You know, we have a highway coming through our city. I have asthma. Majority of the kids, excuse me, not a majority of the kids, but many children in East Boston also have asthma. It is not helped by the fact that we have a highway or that we have Massport and that we haven't had a true assessment of the impact, the environmental impact from Massport, where we are truly measuring their ultrafine particulates that they're dropping on us on a regular basis, or even noise pollution. And honestly, that's a regional concern and issue. I heard about that on the streets in Winthrop and in Revere. We want true transparency so we can actually get true mitigation. And that's something absolutely I could be working on as a senator.
This next question was submitted by Mutual Aid Eastie and was provided in both Spanish and English, so I will begin with the Spanish version. ¿Apoyas el levantar a la prohibición de control de renta para dejar que los municipios deciden sobre una opción local, como lo propuesto por Representatives Alugardo y Connolly en H1378? Do you support lifting the ban on rent control and allowing municipalities to enact a local option, such as what is proposed by Representatives Alugardo and Connolly in H1378?
De nuevo yo voy a comenzar en español. Sí, yo soportar esos movimientos en esa ley para ayudar a la gente en las ciudades para decidir qué es mejor para ellos, separados. Si Cambridge necesitan, tal vez Winthrop no necesitan, tal vez Bedford necesitan y tal vez Fall River no quieren. Pero yo voy a dejar las ciudades y las comunidades decidir si es mejor para ellos. So I personally think that yes, we should be lifting the ban because that's a one-size-fits-all response. The fact is, every city, and as a city official, there's a special kind of formula and a special kind of rhythm that you know about your neighborhoods that you represent in your city. What works in Cambridge may not work in Winthrop. What works in Revere may not work in Fall River. But this ban is saying none of you can even consider the conversation. I would lift the ban and let every locality at least have the conversation and be true and transparent about what they want to do. By the way, the ban is on all forms of rent control, and it comes in hundreds of different forms. It can come on private, it can come on public land, it can apply to small properties, it can apply to large properties only. There's so many different ways to deal with this. It could be temporary, it could be permanent. I would prefer that Cambridge be able to do that and make that decision. I would prefer if Winthrop wants to opt out that they can as well. I don't think the two need to be mutually exclusive, but right now this one-size-fits-all ban, no talk about it, isn't helping anybody.
This next question is from an anonymous attendee and was submitted directly to you, Councilor Edwards. Can you please explain what you meant by an alternative police mechanism that is unarmed, community-based, community-designed, and is about healing? And please provide some examples of how this would look and how you determine which calls you'd send this mechanism to. Thank you.
Well, you can look to SOAR. That's the real lived example that we have in Boston. It's called the Street Outreach Network that we currently use. These are people, individuals, street workers who are responding immediately to gang violence, responding to a shooting, responding to a death in our neighborhoods that have a crisis. They respond unarmed, they respond ready to heal, they respond ready to deal with trauma. They are trained to deal with that. They live in the communities and they come out in many different languages to stop retaliation. That is a perfect example of what we have, and that's what I'd love to see brought to scale. I've been trying as a city councilor to bring a SOAR program over here to East Boston, but they're not funded at a level that they can be citywide. So they went to the hottest parts and the communities that have the hardest amount of shootings right now. I think if we brought them to scale, we might actually help to calm down a lot of tensions in communities and prevent a lot of violence. So that's a real lived example of what I'd like to bring to scale. That's what I meant, and that's the example that I look at. We also have a hub program. If you've seen, it works very well in Chelsea, where they actually bring the police, they bring clinicians, they bring youth workers, they bring, also therapists, and they bring them all in the same room, and they talk about maybe a child that seems to everyone they know. They'll talk about Johnny and say, have you heard from Johnny? Have you seen him? And they understand, we haven't heard from him in a while, or he's doing something different, or he was found with some marijuana, or whatever it was. And they're trying to get to him or her at 14 or 13 years old and saying, now let's redirect. There's some youth jobs that we need to put them in. There's some opportunities to work. I've actually asked to recruit them into my office specifically. So these programs work because it's centered in healing, it's centered in conversation. I don't believe any child especially is to be thrown away or given up on. I think it's a failure on us if they feel that the way that they feel protected and the way that they feel strong is by having a gun. We have failed them as a society. So I don't know that necessarily following up or going to them with a gun is the way to lead this conversation. I want to be very clear. I obviously voted to fund BPD, the Boston Police Department. I voted, and boy did I catch a lot of hell for it. But I believe that you can do both. I believe that you can have an accountable, transparent, good police department, and you can also have an alternative that prevents, hopefully, a lot of violence, that we're meeting people where they are, in the languages that they speak, in the safest way possible. I want both.
Our next question comes from Paul Capurso, an Orient Heights Neighborhood Council member. As you are aware, the residents in this district pay some of the highest car insurance rates in the state, along with Lawrence, Brockton, and Lynn. It has been well known that the reason our rates are high isn't because of thefts, but because of recorded accidents and break-ins arising from Logan parking garages. Several years ago, if I remember correctly, the statistics showed the majority of accidents in the district involved vehicles that were not registered in this area. I ask, would you be willing to work with the Insurance Rate Setting Bureau and mandate a discount for the residents who are deeply impacted, more than anyone else in this state, who deal with tunnels, the airport, etc.?
Absolutely. I would not only be willing to do that, but I would hope that we could lead on that and show that this is an unfair impact that is thrown on us and our shoulders, like many other unfair impacts from the airport and Massport that we end up paying for, literally out of pocket, whether it's also with time as well, because they have failed to account for the fact that they are in our neighborhood of East Boston. They are a guest here. You're an institution here in our home. We did not move into the airport. And I think that there's a real disconnect sometimes that I'd love to help spearhead that conversation and right size it and right course it, so they don't forget that the neighborhoods and the cities of Winthrop, Revere, and Boston were here first, and that they need to be centered no matter what.
Thank you. This next question, again, comes from the Harborview Neighborhood Association co-chair, Skip Marcella, saying, our streets are unsafe due to motorists that do not obey the laws, speeding, running red lights, driving up one-way streets, not stopping at stop signs, etc. What do you propose to make our streets safe again?
So it's both a city council and also Senate response to that. So in terms of making our streets safer at the city level, I personally think that we should stop allocating as a lottery safe street measures. I think every single neighborhood should be able to point to where the problem properties and problem concerns are. We just spoke about it actually about Chelsea and Putnam Street, where the family was hurt recently. And it shouldn't be that I report this yet again, and then I'm told that we need a plan for it. I can tell you who the experts are. It's the people who are sitting in front of me, and they can tell you what they need, which is a stop sign. And I would like to see a better implementation of neighborhood-guided safety measures that are just implemented. But we've also seen that many of the streets that we have are also controlled by the state. And actually, it's the irony that the two, when they're not talking to each other, has left us the most vulnerable. When state highways are running through our neighborhoods, and when they're also bordering us, in many cases, it's a look to them, and they're pointing at each other for issues and concerns. So I would actually, again, go back to the community. I would encourage MassDOT to come to the table, and I would make sure that we're having real conversations about implementing immediate safety measures on our state and city streets.
Our next question is from Bessie King with the Maverick Neighborhood Association. What is your plan, with facts and details, not just generic statements, to tackle affordable housing for current residents across the state and specifically our cities?
Okay, with facts and details, which I'm assuming some laws that I would support, but I just talked about the ban, lifting the ban, but also facts and details. There's the statewide, one of the tax laws, I'm sure I'm about to put you all to sleep, but one of the tax laws that I studied as the director of the Office of Housing Stability was actually a tax incentive for folks to sell their homes below market. And this tax incentive was actually passed by Governor Baker. It has been underutilized. But if you were to sell your house below market, you were going to almost defray or incredibly reduce your capital gains tax. That could have been used in many cases to help create new homeowners, because I believe fundamentally home ownership is the way in which you stabilize a neighborhood. Home ownership is also how you can assure generational wealth and also help bridge overcome the housing crisis. The other parts that I've studied and I'd like to see implemented is incentivizing more cooperative housing, more co-ownership, and the ability for people to own and purchase a triple-decker together, so that we are actually looking at more people purchasing a future in common. Land trusts work. We have the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative in Dudley Square that has well over several hundred properties that are made sure to stay cheap, or at least affordable, for generations to come. So all of these different ways, you can absolutely make sure that you have not only planned, but the state can incentivize, can also help put ARPA funds in different ways to assure that we are creating an affordable future. So that was the law, that's some practical pilot programs, of course, making sure we enforce and understand tenant rights, and making sure we understand landlord obligations as well.
This next question will be our final one of the long form, not pre-planned questions. It comes from Jessica Curtis with the Harborview Neighborhood Association. Much ink has been spilled on the outsized role Massport plays in our neighborhood's environmental health. Talk of the airport's expansion through more flights and bigger planes slowed, but didn't stop during the COVID-19 pandemic, with very little mention in the popular press of community impacts or whether Massport should be expanding as the climate changes and sea levels rise. These conversations are often separated, as if we can have expansion without considering the environmental impacts on our health. What opportunities will you take if you are elected senator to right-size the role that impacted communities should play in setting economic, environmental, and climate change policy for Massport in the years ahead?
That's an excellent question, and I think we have a perfect example of what happened on our seaport or on our coastal line when Massport just essentially ignored or didn't really follow a lot of our local zoning. Because they're quasi-state, they're able to kind of build at a level that's faster and get through different, what other developers would have to go through. Massport doesn't have to really be adhered to, especially in our shipyard, another controversial project that's coming up. So I think the first thing, because I've been trained as a city councilor and understand zoning at an intimate level, I would be sitting with Massport and saying, you need these guidelines, these hard-fought zoning laws matter, and you need to comply with them if you're going to be building and developing in East Boston. That's number one. Number two, in terms of the way that we have negotiated with Massport, it really comes down to you can grow a little bit, then you get a park, or a little bit of a park, and you can do this and you can do that. And there really needs to come down to that is not a true compensation for our neighborhood. They've taken a lot more than they have given, and we need to just simply set a firm standard for what they need to be paying, what they need to be giving, and how they need to contribute, whether they're allowed to expand or not. They've gotten $50 million at least from the federal government to help recoup from the loss of travel, and we need to also say, like, you have been made whole. We need to be made whole. You're still fulfilling a lot of your promises, red, blue line connector and so on and so forth, that you need to be making us whole. And we also need to really honestly ask ourselves, is Massport, how Massport has contributed on our pilot payments. Those are payments in lieu of taxes, and they are up for renegotiation this year. I think they should be made public. I think there should be able to be a public comment on them, and we need to be deciding if they're actually giving what is fair and worthy and valuable, not just to East Boston, but to the region. So there's some good conversation. I'm telling you, I'm looking at the generations of experts who've had to deal with this right now. I would look to you again, not just for the laws, but for the standards we need to set for Massport. And I would look for you to help me write those laws that actually enshrine those standards, to make sure that we're actually making sure that Massport is the best neighbor that they possibly can be.
We will move on to our lightning round of yes or no questions. These will either be in the form of a statement that you either find to be true or false, or a direct question. Is East Boston being overdeveloped? Yes or no?
Yes.
Have you ever eaten at Luna's restaurant? Yes or no?
I honestly can't remember. I think so. I'm so sorry.
Adult use recreational cannabis stores have an overall negative impact on their surrounding neighborhood. Yes or no?
An overall negative impact? So they're saying, just to make sure I understand the yes or no, say that adult use recreational pot stores have no impact on their neighborhoods?
A negative impact on the surrounding neighborhood.
So negative impact is no impact. Am I understanding the question correctly?
Negative like bad. Yeah, like a
Oh,
bad.
have a negative impact. Sorry, I'm thinking negative like zero, less than zero.
No.
So, yes or no, do pot stores, have a negative impact on their overall?
On the community, and the surrounding community, yes.
No.
Do you support the current citywide mask mandate? Yes or no?
Yes.
The full name of the pedestrian and bicycle path that runs from Orient Heights to Maverick Square is called the Mary Ellen Welch Greenway. Yes or no?
The bikeway, the greenway? Yeah, it's Mary Ellen Welch.
Do you take the blue line to work? Yes or no?
Sometimes. So yes, I guess, because I take it sometimes, so yes. But not all the time. It's true. That's the truth.
When entering a rotary from a multi-lane street,
Oh,
do you write all lanes to be clear before proceeding into the rotary? Yes or no?
In true disclosure, I failed my driver's license test at 17. I never thought I'd have to say that. I failed it, so I try to take the tea, okay? I'm sorry. I really am no, that's not fair. I won't. I'm sorry. If it's a driving, I failed the test, okay? It was traumatic enough. That's 20 years ago, all right? I'm still paying for it, apparently. Jesus.
The public beach in Orient Heights is known as Continental Beach. Yes or no?
Constitution Beach?
Continental.
No, but Constitution Beach. So no, sorry.
And this will be our final yes or no question. All East Boston residents have ample and equal access to job, school, and recreational opportunities. Yes or no?
No.
With that, we will move on to closing statements.
Well, I want to thank you all for showing up tonight, and I hope you see whatever the questions that are proposed to me, I'm ready, willing, and able to answer in a transparent way. Whether you agree or disagree with me, you find I will show up. I will meet you where you are. I will try in as many languages as possible, and I will be held accountable by you. I know many of you in this room. I also don't know many of you in this room, but I will say this to those who are in this room. We have agreed, we have disagreed. But I can say honestly, I've had real conversations with you when we've disagreed, and that's what you'll have in me as your senator. I will sit down and I will listen. I'm proud of the coalition I have built. I know some people want to throw out the fact that there are people on the far, far left that support me, or that there's this kind of person that supports me. I can honestly say you can't say who is a typical Lydia Edwards supporter, because we come in all colors, we come from all over the world, we speak many languages. Some of us come from single-parent homes like me, some of them come from well-off homes and well-resourced. I'm proud of that coalition. I'm not going to apologize for having diversity and different thoughts at the table when I go to lead and who will help support me. I'm never going to apologize for that. I'm proud of the neighborhood that I represent. I'm proud of East Boston that helped make me a homeowner and helped make me a city councilor. So much of what I'm able to do is because of this incredible neighborhood and people showing up. I appreciate of everything, and just know this, I will keep showing up. You ask me to show up, I will be there. I don't assume that you should be coming to me. I will go where you are. Thank you for this opportunity, and I'm happy to stick around for additional questions if you have any, but thank you.
And with that, we will close out the live stream in the Zoom and provide a transcript of the questions and responses following this evening, both in Spanish and in English. Thank you so much.
Thank you.